It's a mystery. How do we get the comments? We don't know. We don't know. I'm telling you right now, we don't know. If you drop comments,
we don't know.
In the thing, we want you to do that. But if you think we're going to read them on air, it's not that we don't want to.
It's
we don't
too far
know
away,
how.
and I can't even see it. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Pursuit. My name is Jeff Hutchin, and this is John Sporov, and we are getting to the end of 2021, which is absolutely amazing that we are here, and I'm joined by my French partner, Pepe Saborov, with that cool hat. Where'd you get that?
Francais.
Did you?
Paris.
Or did you get it at Kohl's?
Yeah, they had a sale. They had a sale at Ross.
No, I like it. It looks good on you, man. See, that's the thing. You can pull stuff off like that.
Yeah, I pull it out of my winter box. I got Tara's boxes. This is the winter box of hats and so forth. And anyway, she brought out the boxes, and I'm like, it's time because the weather is turning.
Kingerall or whatever. What's that? Kingo.
Yo,
is that brand?
TFO. Going back to the '80s with the Kango.
Right on.
Wraps.
Well, anyway, we are glad to be with you here today, and we are going to be in part 6 of the Lord's Prayer. Before we get to that, though, let's talk a little bit about our partner today is Realty One Group. Gary Carlson and his team, unbelievable what they've done with Realty One. We were with Gary when he started the franchise in Colorado, and it's just exploded. They're doing an incredible job. They're all over Colorado in the Front Range, and they are a faith-based organization. At least the leadership of Realty One Group is faith-based, and they really want to pursue a relationship with their with their customers in such a way that it becomes a lifelong relationship, and they really are going to put your needs at the forefront. So if you are in that business of wanting to buy, sell, lease, whatever it might be, reach out to them. You can find them on the web at realtyonegroup.premier.com, and when you reach them, reach out to Gary and tell him that The Pursuit sent you to them. So we'd appreciate that. All right, my man, we are working our way through this prayer, and we're almost done. I think we've got this section or this little piece and one more, and we'll be wrapping it up on the Lord's Prayer. I hope this has been encouraging to you guys if you've been following along with us and reading in Matthew 6 about the Lord's Prayer, and hopefully it's provided you some more depth and understanding of really what Jesus was trying to show us and teach us as he shared this prayer with us. And we are in Verse 13 today. So why don't you read that for everybody, and then we'll kind of dive into it.
Yep, it says, "Do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one."
Okay. So let's break it down. What is Jesus saying here? Because remember, what we've been talking about, for those who've been following along with us, what Jesus has been providing for us really is kind of a framework and an outline as to how, first and foremost, we prepare our hearts before we go to the Lord, and then how we begin to put supplication and things before the Lord in this position of preparation. So we're getting towards the end of the prayer. So why would Jesus, do you think, begin to close the prayer in such a way? What is he referring to, and what's he talking about, in your opinion?
Yeah, so what is a temptation? I found this definition. It says a temptation is a trial or affliction that tests our virtue.
Okay.
So we think about, there's sort of two flavors of this, right? One is a temptation that's sort of God, God allows all of it, right? But it's kind of a test by God. And we think about the example of Jesus being tested and tempted in the wilderness that really established his sonship or revealed what was already in him, right? What does a temptation or a test do? It reveals what's already in you. It doesn't put something there, it reveals it. There's something there we need to dive into later. It just occurred to me. But the second is this temptation to lead you astray. We're more, I think, familiar with that type of temptation, if you will, that says here's something there's nothing good about it. It's the bait that's designed to lead you away and get you off course, get you off track with your mission of your life.
I agree with all that. Here's kind of my perspective on how I looked at it and how I see it. Is let's first back up and talk about this truth and ask this question: does God tempt his children?
Well, yeah. If you're asking me, or are you going rhetorical?
No, I'm asking the question.
James 1 says that is not true.
Okay, so God does not tempt. So what does God do? What God does is he leads us into trials. Okay? So let's talk about a trial, what a trial is for a minute. So let's take it into the physical courtroom. Let's say that you've been accused of something, okay? So you get summoned and you're brought into the courtroom in front of the judge. And what is brought before the judge?
An accusation.
An accusation that is brought against you. And in order for that accusation to stick, at least in the court of law, what has to happen? What's the onus on the prosecutor?
Burden of proof is
Right.
on the onus of the prosecution.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Facts must be presented to a judge in such a way that's so convincing that the only outcome that could be of that is you are guilty of this, right? That's how the court system is supposed to work. That's a trial. So if you really look at trials at a very basic level, if we were to boil all that down and say, what is a trial? A trial is a test.
Yep.
A trial is a test. What is being tested in a trial? An accusation. Okay?
Right.
That's what's happening. So with that understanding, that basic understanding of what a trial is in a courtroom here on earth, let's now talk about what trials are from God's perspective. Because what we do know is that God will lead us into trials. He doesn't cause us to be tempted, but we're led into trials. So based on that definition I just used in a courtroom, if God is leading us in a trial, what's the purpose of a trial of God? Why would God lead his children into a trial?
Well, I can tell you that the answer from Scripture in James 1 in the beginning, it says, consider it pure joy when you're tempted, when you're put into trial, right? Knowing that the trying of your faith works patience. And let patience have her perfect work.
Okay.
Right, in your life. It's designed because at the end of it, you're going to be complete, or what does it say? That you'll be complete, lacking nothing, right? That this is a part of growth. Part of growth. And we need to look at,
So let me stop there.
Yeah.
Let me stop there. I agree with that. But how do you measure growth?
how do you measure growth?
How do you measure someone's growth? In other words, back to my question,
yeah.
if God is going to lead us into a trial, it eventually will lead to growth, hopefully. How do you understand whether or not a person has grown or not? What's required?
That you passed the test or that you failed and learned.
Okay, so there's a testing that must take place. So back to what you said. The purpose of a trial is for testing. Period. Right? So we need to understand that first. So think about this progression. A trial, so with Jesus, you brought it up earlier. When Jesus, after he was baptized by John the Baptist, it says in Luke chapter 4 that the very next thing that happened is it says the Spirit of God leads Jesus into the desert to be tested.
Right.
Okay? A trial.
Right.
And what typically happens in a trial is where a testing is where it's the most opportune time for Satan to tempt us is during the time of a trial. Okay? Why is that, do you think?
Because we're in a position of need. We're in a position of exposure. We're in a position of, what's another word for that? But
No, I think it's beautiful what you're saying, because what's happening in a trial is our flesh is being exposed.
Yes.
Right? It's being challenged. Your flesh is being challenged, because one thing about a trial, it's a difficult time which is going to challenge all those things. Wants, needs, desires, all those things that you're describing that lead us into that place. And Jesus was in that place. He'd been fasting for 40 days.
Yep.
He was in the desert. It's not a conducive place to live. So his flesh was under complete trial, under complete testing. And God knew that this was necessary. So it says that at that point, when he was at his physical weakest point, is when Satan showed up. And we know what's going on here, because you have to ask the question, what was God testing in Jesus?
Sonship.
Sonship. Are you going to, simply put, Jesus, are you going to respond as a son, or are you going to respond as an orphan? In other words, are you going to default to your flesh and make sure that your flesh is taken care of, or are you going to submit and surrender to the will of the Father, which is sonship?
That's right.
Right?
And through that experience, he wasn't, again, I'll say it again, he wasn't creating sonship. He wasn't creating something in him. He was exposing something that was already there.
How do we know that?
Because he said he engaged.
Luke chapter 3.
What do you mean?
Right before the trial.
Yeah.
What
This
happened?
Is my son.
He's baptized.
Right.
What did God say to him? He called out in him what was already there.
Right.
This is my son in whom I am well pleased.
Right.
So
That
he
was
said,
the deposit.
sonship is there.
That's right.
Jesus. The ability and the capacity to fulfill what I've called you to do is there. The question is, are you going to activate it and actually walk it out? And by the way, that's not just true of Jesus. That's true of you and I.
That's right.
God has a purpose for you and I on this planet. It may not be to die for the sins of the world like it was for Jesus. It's
Right.
not. But we have a purpose nonetheless. And so the question is, if are you going to choose sonship, which now gives you and activates the ability for you to actually fulfill that which God has called you to, or are you going to revert, fail the test,
Right.
and fall to
Answer
the
the
place
call
of
of the
orphan
flesh.
spirit,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah. It's on one hand, the example of Jesus being led into the wilderness, is a perfect example of what it means that to be tested and to pass the test. But understand this: Jesus passed every test. So what is the value of it? The value of it is it shows you the pattern. It shows you how God allows, even though He didn't cause it, He didn't author it. He's not the author of this temptation. That He allowed it and used it to establish something good in Him, and so also He does it with us. That same pattern.
Okay, so I appreciate the way you said that. You said that He does not author the temptation, but can we agree that He authors the trial?
I would say that, I don't know. It's hard for me to. I think that the distinction between trial and temptation is subjective. It is an experience that to the person undergoing it is a temptation. But from God's perspective, it's simply revealing what's already in our hearts. It's a trial, a test that's codifying something, that's revealing something that's already there. It's a test of our character.
This is good. So let's break this down a little bit more, because I may differ with you a little bit on this, and that's okay. Let me ask you this question. Have there been times where you personally have gone through a trial and not experienced a temptation?
No, I would say no, because in every trial, the temptation is to go to the flesh, to the carnal mind, to the I can't trust God. There's always a detracting force inside of the test, because otherwise it's not really a test to me, is it? For me, to test something means it's either pass fail, it's how well am I going to do against this standard. And there's and the implication is there is a force that's pulling me away from that standard, right? And so that's the resistance. So for me, temptation is just simply resistance within the context of a trial.
I couldn't disagree. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I agree completely with you. Is what I'm trying to say is you know, as we step into that trial, as we step into that difficult time, is what God is saying. I have to test and see how true your sonship is in this moment.
Right.
I have to, and it's not a test for Him, by the way. He knows. What He's doing is he's testing us to reveal it within us, that it get exposed within us. And there's times, to now press back a little bit, there's times where we enter into a trial and temptation may present itself. There's times when that temptation is so overwhelming that we either get to the edge of the cliff and by the grace of God we hold on and we don't fall into it. And there's other times where we kind of see that temptation out on the horizon and you go, you know what, I'm not even going to give it another thought. And we're much more successful in our test than we would otherwise. So my question for you, what is the difference between those moments when we see it on the horizon and go, not even going there. It's still there. I can see the temptation over there, and I could pursue it if I really wanted to.
Yes.
Versus the times where we either completely fall off the cliff or we get to the edge and go, no, I can't do it. And we turn back around and go the other way.
To me, the answer, at least for me, is two things. It's experience and perspective. Experience says, I've been through this before. I know the end of this story. I know what happens in chapter 12 of this story, having fallen to that before, and I think I want to avoid that. Like, God will, in His graciousness, allow us to go through, because that's just part of this. It's not a 100-meter sprint. At the end of it, we're just done, right? It's like, no, you better walk back. It's like in the Olympic trials. You know what I mean? Oh, you're going to walk back, and you're going to be tested again. And so the hope and the expectation is that arc of our life begins to do this, that it's rising as we pass these tests. And sometimes we fail and are presented with the same thing the next day, the next week, the next year. And our experience informs us in the middle of that trial. There's that thing, to your point, that's off there on the horizon, that temptation. I know what happens there.
And that's really the difference between wisdom and foolishness, right?
Okay.
Foolishness is we have an experience, we know where that trail leads, and we still decide to go down that trail and fall into that temptation.
Right.
Even though we already knew what the result has been in the past, I'm going to do it again, and we do it over and over and over again. That's the definition of foolishness. Ignorance is, I've never experienced this before. I don't know what the end of the trail looks like. And then we get there and go, oh, wow, I didn't know. I didn't realize. Make a note to self. Wisdom is, I've had a past experience.
Yes.
I've either succeeded or failed in the past. But yet this time, I'm going to apply wisdom.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, I know what it's like. I'm not going to do it again. And we move forward in righteousness, right?
I would make a distinction between that and perspective. That's why the two things that I chose there. One, experience, meaning I've been through something similar to this before. The other is perspective, that says I may not have been through something exactly like this before, but I'm smart enough to be able to see that the consequence of me falling to that temptation is much broader and deeper and longer than what it appears, right? It is.
Here's a good example.
Yeah.
Let me give you a good example. And this is, I think guys will especially appreciate this. And I heard this many years after I was beyond teenage years. But I'll never forget a pastor one time saying to a bunch of youth, listen, if you're going to make the choice to remain sexually pure in your dating relationships, the time to make that the time to make that decision is now. Don't wait till you're in the back seat of the car.
That's right.
Because it's too late.
That's right.
So that's a matter of perspective, saying, you know what, I've never experienced this situation before, but I'm going to choose to make the decision that I'm not even going to get close to the back seat before trying to make that decision in the heat of battle. And
let me add the other side of that same coin, though, and this is really where I was going to. I appreciate you saying that, because that is also true. But equally, it's not just I'm going to get ahead of that decision and not put myself in a position where it's just too late. But the other thing is to be able to see that the consequence of this is a much longer tail. That's a pregnancy and raising a kid for 20 years, right? There's a 20-year, I don't want to say mistake, but a consequence to what that situation entails. Sure. And so I think it's both sides of it. It's sort of, how do I avoid it? And then how do I see it for what it is? Like, the lie of it is temporary pleasure, right? And at the end of it, yeah, you may feel guilty. No, that's the lie. The lie of it, or the truth of it, is there is a long arc that leads downward around my view of myself, of God, walking in condemnation, potentially having to raise a kid that I'm not prepared to raise, right, in that example.
how you view the opposite sex. I mean, there's all kinds of things that
problems you're going to avoid in marriage 20 years from now. I mean, this is a long arc. And so can we, in the middle of that trial, be able to acknowledge that temptation and see it for what it is?
Yeah. And let me just say this. It's something else as it relates to the life of Jesus in this particular moment. We're talking about the desert with the enemy. Because if you play out the rest of that story in Luke chapter 4, we know that Jesus gets challenged 3 times. And in each case, what Satan is challenging him on is the very thing we said that God was testing him on. That was sonship. And Satan knew this. He said, I need to test this sonship thing. Because what Satan knew, Satan knows. Satan knew and knows that if Jesus chooses sonship over the orphan spirit, he will actually he's now empowered to carry out that which his Father has put on him. That's why he challenged sonship and not some other area. And he went right at it, and he called it for what it is. If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to turn to bread and satisfy your flesh.
Take the shortcut.
And Jesus answers question 1, A+++. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. What is he saying? My flesh isn't important. What's important, and more important than anything else, is the words, the truth that my Father speaks. Right? So we see this battle going on in the wilderness. And then what happens at the end of this? It says that Satan leaves. It doesn't say Jesus kicks him in the tail. It doesn't say he stomps on his head or grabs his throat. It says that Satan leaves. The reason why Satan leaves is Satan realizes he has no power and authority in this situation. And he has no other choice but to leave. But what else does it say, though? He leaves for what? a more opportune time.
Yeah.
What is the what's the most opportune time
Gethsemane.
that Satan shows up in anyone's life? It's during trial.
Sure.
It's during trials.
Sure.
It's during testing. Satan knows that when you enter into a trial, when you enter into a testing, that's your most susceptible moment to fail and to fall, right? And he knew that about us, and he certainly knew that about Jesus. And the next time he shows up in a very real way is, to your point you just made, in the garden, right?
Yep.
Because he sees Jesus going through arguably the most difficult trial he's ever gone through in his human life. And he goes, here's my chance. Is it still worth it, Jesus?
Yeah,
Are you still want to go there?
Exactly.
Because I could bail you out of this thing real quick.
Easy.
Here
Here's
it
the
is, right?
shortcut.
And so what's the lesson for us? The lesson for us is what we need to be aware of is it's those moments when life hits. It's those moments when things don't go our way. It's those moments where we're physically weak, emotionally weak, spiritually weak, whatever it is. That's when Satan sees the opportunity to pounce, and we must be aware. And as Paul says, as I become less and less and less, he must become greater and greater and greater in order for me to accomplish what it is God has called me to, right? And if you compare that wilderness experience that Jesus had that lasted 40 days, and you compare it to another wilderness experience, the children of Israel,
Yeah.
the test was the same. It was the exact same test. The children of Israel went through the exact same test that Jesus did.
That's right.
It was the test of sonship. And God, in a very literal sense, said to the children of Israel, you're not going to experience what I have promised you, referred to as the promised land and other things, all the blessings that come with it. And so in a very literal sense, what God is saying to us and to them, he's saying, if you want to experience the things that I promised for you, what you must grasp is what it means to be a son.
Yeah.
And I'm going to
test.
show you.
Yeah.
And and we've talked about this. The reason why the Israelites were in the desert for 40 years is not because they were lost. It wasn't because it was a long distance between Egypt and Israel. It's because they kept failing the test over and over and over again. They went around the mountain multiple times in a very literal and spiritual sense.
And the flip side of that is the two that went in passed the test.
Yeah.
And they passed it immediately.
That's right.
They said, no, the other spies, there are giants in the land and we are as grasshoppers in their sight.
Yeah.
These two, Joshua and Caleb,
can do
we're well
this.
able.
Yeah.
We're well able
We can
to
do
take
this.
them. We can take them.
We can do
And
this.
take them out.
That's right.
And guess what they got to do, right? They passed that same test. They passed the test and were given the reward of that test by being able to walk into the promised land.
So again, back to the two stories and the two examples that we're providing here, that the lesson for you and I is this, that if we want to walk in a kingdom fulfilling way, if we want to reach the purposes for which God has created you and I to accomplish, the only way we're going to be able to do that is by answering the test of sonship. And God loves us so much that he will let us go around that mountain for 40 years, for a lifetime, if necessary, because he says you've got to grasp this in order for you to experience all that I have for you. And not just in heaven. I'm talking about this side of heaven, in this life that we've been given.
So rather than, can we shift our paradigm from this whole thing about, because normally when people talk about this, they're so focused on, wait a minute, was it God that it's bringing that into our life? Why would he say to pray against it? And then he said in James that we get so wrapped up around attribution. Oh, it's the devil that does it. Oh, it's God that does this. No, or he allows it. And theology, just, get wrapped around the theology axle on this whole thing without just embracing that in the beginning of James chapter 1, it says, this is part of my growth. And whether it's God, it's a devil, yes, the answer is yes. Both and, yes, it is. He's trying, the devil's trying to take you out and get you to just spend your life wrapped around this orphanhood sort of spirit, and God saying, but here's another opportunity, come around that mountain again and be a son. Listen to what Martin Luther noted about temptations. This is a quote. He says, my temptations have been masters in divinity. Isn't that good?
It is so good.
It's like, see it for what it is. Listen, I want to pass every test, but I also don't want to have an exam every day. I was a pretty good, math and physics student. I didn't ask every day, hey, Mr. Van Loo, are we going to have another test
Can you throw
today?
another test at me?
I
want to show you how much I know.
Yeah, but it's the embracing of, no, the test, knowing that it's coming, is my insurance for doing my homework and staying aware and vigilant and growing in my knowledge and all that kind of stuff. Can we just see it for what it is? We're all going to go through these things. God's going to use it all for good. We're going to fail, by the way. Can we give ourselves an opportunity, just a pass? It says
grace and mercy.
There's grace and mercy.
That's right.
And we're going to be able to and learn. What Conor McGregor says, you don't ever lose, you just fail and learn, or something. Yeah.
There's only one way to get the A+, and that's through the blood of Christ, period. Right? And that's just truth. And, I'll just point this out. I think part of what we see in Jesus in this last part of the prayer is we see some humanity in his prayer. And because no one wants to be led into temptation. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, don't lead us into trial. But he says, don't lead us into temptation, meaning, there's a learning process. And when we're walking in significant obedience, those trials can be much shorter, just like they were for Jesus. The trial for him was 40 days versus 40 years. And so we have the ability we don't have to go the tough road all the time to learn a lesson. If we can continue to walk in obedience and we can continue to walk in faithfulness, life will be much simpler and much less complex than when we choose the other path, right? Life can get pretty crazy. It doesn't mean if you're obedient and you're faithful in every step of the way that life's going to be easy. I'm not saying that. I'm just going to say it's a lot less complex when we choose to walk in a position of obedience versus disobedience. And I think that's part of what Jesus is saying here is God, one thing I always pray for my kids is please make, their bottom, my ceiling. In other words, don't make them experience the things I had to experience in order to learn the lessons that I learned, right? Because they're painful and they hurt and it's challenging. However, God, if that's what's required,
your will.
If that's what's required,
refiner's fire, man.
Then may it be. And that's you don't really fully understand that until you become a parent and you have teenagers,
or you get gray hair. That's what happens.
That's why you and I are filled with it, and that's why you have none.
No, now I know that it is there. A lot of salt in this pepper. For those on Apple Podcasts, you can't see it, but I am doing the wisdom stroke of the beard right now. This is the thinker. I just need like a pipe.
There you go.
Maybe a pipe.
I've asked for that for Christmas. Believe it or not, a pipe. I think pipes are cool.
Yeah, I do too.
I love that tobacco smell. Anyway, we digress.
We do.
That's part of my temptation, I guess, is the tobacco. Yeah. But you can pray for me about that. Hey, thank you for joining us. We got one more session here that we're going to talk about the Lord's Prayer, wrap up that baby, and then we'll see where God takes us next. We've got an amazing 2022 plan for you guys.
Yeah.
So awesome. You'll hear more about that as we unwrap it all as we head into the new year. But until then, thank you. As we are on the relentless pursuit of truth and transformation, thank you for joining us here on The Pursuit. We'll see you next time.